And if I told you that the most anticipated car of the 2025 season, the Ferrari SF-25, could be convicted since its birth? And what was Lewis Hamilton who discovered it, without even knowing? From the pre-season tests there were indications of inconsistencies. Some voices inside the paddock talked about a promising car base, but extremely sensitive. However, it was during the Grand Prix of Spain where all alarms were lit. Barcelona, a circuit that traditionally reveals the real balance of a car, was the scenario where Hamilton lived one of the most frustrating experiences of his entire career. From the first round of Sunday, something did not square. The car did not respond, the balance was erratic, the rear axle seemed to float in each high-speed curve. And the most shocking was Hamilton's tone of the race at the end of the race, when he told his engineer on the radio, "I think we have something wrong with this car, friend. It's the worst thing that has ever been." It was not a banal criticism. It was the declaration of a pilot who has won races in impossible conditions, which has led to the limit cars, but that had never felt something so disconnected from the ground, so unpredictable, so insecure. The truly revealing is that after that message, the team internally recognized a serious failure. It was not a matter of tires or on tuning. It was a structural problem. And although the official statement was non-existent, internal sources allowed to filter that both Hamilton and Leclerc had been running with a technically defective car from the middle of the Grand Prix. The severity of this revelation is not only mechanical, it is also symbolic. Ferrari, who aspired to give a blow of authority with his new pair, had given his pilots a car unable to stay stable in the most demanding conditions. Moreover, the institutional response was silence. Hamilton and Leclerc were instructed not to talk about the subject anymore. The order was blunt. No public statements, no technical explanations. This attitude of censorship reveals much more than a simple technical error. It shows a culture of concealment that can be lethal in a championship where every detail counts, and where operational transparency is key to evolving in time. That weekend in Barcelona was not just a low point in Ferrari's performance. It was a turning point, a moment in which it was clear that something deep was failing in the technical heart of the SF-25. And the worst, that those who had to solve it preferred to hide it. What Lewis Hamilton experienced in Barcelona was not a simple passing anomaly. It was the symptom of a deep and structural design failure that had been managing from the first day of the SF-25 life. And to understand the magnitude of the problem, you have to go beyond the results and listen carefully to what the pilot himself felt. Total disconnection between car and asphalt, a constant unpredictability, a loss of confidence that even his talent could not mitigate. The disaster nucleus lies in the pull-rod-type rear suspension of the SF-25. In theory, this architecture offers benefits in terms of mass and aerodynamic distribution. But in practice, Ferrari made a critical mistake. They underestimated the structural stiffness levels necessary to maintain a stable platform. The result was a car unable to maintain a constant height in fast curves, with a flat background that collapsed under pressure, decomposing aerodynamic load at times where it is most needed. In modern Formula One, where every millimeter counts, that type of behavior is a competitive death sentence. It was no accident that Hamilton and Leclerc reported similar sensations in completely different conditions. Melbourne, Shanghai, and finally Spain. The pattern was clear, but no one had connected the points until Hamilton, at a time of raw honesty, described his experience as the worst feeling that the car had ever had. This confession not only ignited the alarms in Ferrari, it also served as an internal catalyst for the team to recognize something that had been trying to hide for weeks. The car was not working, and it was not the guilt of the pilots or the tuning. For Lewis, the discovery brought with it a type of peculiar relief. Because in Formula One, there is no worse feeling for a pilot than feeling guilty about something that cannot be controlled. Knowing that the problem was technical and not human allowed Hamilton to recover a part of the trust he had lost. Even so, emotional damage was already done. It was not only a difficult car, it was a structure that was not supporting its new leader, just when I needed answers. The solution that Ferrari proposed was radical: to design from scratch a new rear suspension. A change in this magnitude is not done lightly. It implies reviewing complete geometries, redesign anchors, recalibrate the behavior of the flat background, and completely readjust the aerodynamic package. All this while competing every weekend. According to leaks, the new system has already passed through dynamic bank and is being tested in the wind tunnel. Hope is having it ready for Silverstone. But in the meantime, the SF-25 continues to run with an open wound, forcing its pilots to extract performance from a chassis that, in its current state, does not respond to any logical pattern of behavior. This moment, more than a pump in performance, has become a true character test. For Lewis, for Leclerc, and for the entire Ferrari project. Because what is at stake is no longer only the championship, but the very soul of a team that promised to return to the top, but that right now cannot guarantee even stability in a launched return. What is happening with the SF-25 is not a simple technical crisis. It is a warning on the tolerance limit that can support a team with championship aspirations. Ferrari has not only built a car that is not up to the demands of the modern Formula One, but has done so in the most critical year in its recent history. Because this 2025 is not just any season. It is the year in which the regulation has stabilized, the improvement margins have minimized, and any structural error is paid with months of committed performance. And this is where the real problem emerges clearly. What should have been the Pilar del Resurgir de Ferrari, a solid design, backed by one of the best pilots of all time, has ended up being one of its greatest weaknesses. Lewis Hamilton, far from being the instant salvador that many imagined, has become the witness of a technical collapse that threatens to drag the entire project towards a spiral of frustration. The late introduction of a new rear suspension could correct part of the deficit, but does not erase the damage already done. Each lost prize in these conditions is equivalent to points that do not recover. And even more serious, compromises the morals of the team, the confidence of the pilots, and the credibility of the technical direction led by Frédéric Vasseur. Ferrari had opted for stability to continuity to avoid historical improvisation errors. But the current situation shows that improvisation did not disappear, it only disguised itself under an apparent serenity. This scenario also raises uncomfortable questions for Hamilton himself. His arrival to Ferrari was interpreted as a calculated, mature, even symbolic movement. But now he faces an unexpected crossroads: how to lead a team whose car does not allow him to show the best of himself. It is a challenge that goes beyond driving. It implies internal diplomacy, capacity for technical influence, and an emotional resilience that has rarely been tested in this way in your career. After the Spanish Grand Prix, Ferrari could not continue to maintain the facade. The performance had been so poor, and the complaints of the pilots so consistent, that the only viable exit was to admit the obvious. Something in the SF-25 did not work as it should. What began as a series of loose comments by Lewis Hamilton ended up forcing the technical direction to carry out an internal evaluation that ended up confirming the worst fears. The failure was not only real but was present in both cars. It was an uncomfortable revelation. Despite the efforts to contain the narrative, the information quickly leaked into the paddock. Ferrari confirmed that both Hamilton and Charles Leclerc had competed with a defective car from the middle of the race in Barcelona. The problem, which initially seemed like a subjective balance of balance, turned out to have measurable technical foundations. Rear axle instability, sudden losses of aerodynamic load, inconsistencies in the management of the height of the body, and a complete collapse of the flat background under dynamic loads. The most revealing fact is that this ruling was shared, in terms of consequences, by both pilots. There was no possibility of blaming a particular driving style, a poorly executed configuration, or a career strategy. It was a structural limitation that affected car 16 and 44. This raised the problem of an individual issue to a systemic failure, amplifying the urgency of finding a definitive solution. The immediate order of the team was absolute silence. The pilots were instructed not to speak publicly about the origin of the problem. Ferrari, historically jealous of his image and his engineering, opted for a total control of the narrative. But that decision only served to increase external speculation. When such an explicit censorship is imposed, silence no longer hides the problem. It makes it an implicit statement of its gravity. This confirmation also puts under scrutiny the entire development and validation process of the SF-25. How is it possible that a failure of such magnitude was not detected in the previous simulations, in the preseason tests, or even during the first races? The answers to that question are still without arriving. But what is clear is that, from that moment, the team had to rebuild its technical approach from scratch. And do so under pressure, with every race weekend exposing the open wound publicly in its design. The official recognition of the ruling was the breakdown. It was no longer a subjective perception or a bad isolated career. It was a tangible, replicable defect, which directly conditioned Ferrari's competitiveness on the track. And while Hamilton became the visible face of this implicit complaint, Ferrari had to begin the difficult task of redesigning not only his rear suspension, but also his credibility as a serious contender to the championship. The story of Lewis Hamilton and the SF-25 is not just another chapter in his career. It is perhaps one of the most complex and human he has lived, because it's not about losing races, not even winning titles. It is about facing the reality of a project that, for the moment, has not lived up to the name that supports it. And do it with the media pressure, the look of millions of fans, and the symbolic weight of dressing the red of Ferrari. When Hamilton signed with Ferrari, many talked about legacy, romanticism to close the circle. But now what is imposed is the raw truth. The legacy is built with facts, not with intentions. And romanticism disappears as soon as the car does not respond in a fast curve or sinks into an unstable braking. The question that remains is as simple as powerful. Can this project be saved? Or is it another case of expectations that do not align with technical reality? Because if a pilot like Hamilton, with his experience, precision, and adaptability, cannot find consistency in this car, what real hope is for Ferrari this season? And not least, how much more time Hamilton will push a car that limits it instead of enhancing it? What happens if the promised solution for Silverstone does not comply with what was expected? What will be the psychological impact of repeating career after career this same frustration? You who follow this sport every weekend with the same passion as us, do you think Ferrari will be redeemed before it is too late? Let me know your opinion in the comments.